So I was rooting around the websites and I came across a course that's been that was written by a man called Andrew Olensky. So he was the director of the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies, which is an offshoot from IMS, which is the big meditation center in Barry, Massachusetts. That was begun by Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg, Jack Cornfield, some of you know, and lots of others too. So he did a lot of good work while he was there, and they produced a very good magazine. Anyway, he's done a course based on the Karaniya Metta Sutta, which is what we normally go through at the end of this sitting. So I thought I'd just go through it to give you an idea of how the Buddha puts it all together. And then if you want, I'll put the link for that course if you want to take it a bit further. Okay. So I shall start. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the Blessed Noble and fully self-awakened one. Yeah, just in case I forget at the end, I hope you have a joyful Christmas and a great New Year. I usually forget to say those sort of things. Okay, so the Karaniya Metta Sutta is the discourse on what we ought to do in order to develop metta. That's what Karaniya means. And it comes from a very early strata of the Buddha's teachings. It's which was a collection of verses. So remember that in those days, they couldn't read and write. It's a bit odd to think of the Buddha as an illiterate, but he was. And therefore, because it was written as a verse, it's pretty close to what he himself would have developed, you see. So that word metta comes from the word mitta, which means friends. Now, to translate metta, we can use the words that you'll see, this loving kindness. So loving is the attitude that you have within yourself, and kindness is the way you express it. Yeah. There's another one called goodwill. See, that stresses the role of intention and the will itself. And of course, it's in the Christmas greeting, isn't it? You know, peace on earth and goodwill to all men, or as we would say, all sentient beings. Bhikkhu Bodhi's definition is a heartfelt concern for the well-being and happiness of others. And I think that sort of touches a bit on compassion, really. And it doesn't really mention that there's no self-interest and there's no attachment. So we've got lots of types of love: erotic, romantic, family relationships, friends, people at work. Now, those aren't evil. You would still have those relationships even if you were fully liberated. But unfortunately, because we're not liberated, there'll be some attachment to them. There'll be some expectations of them, which leads to disappointment and sometimes to control. So that's all to do with the type of unwholesome love. Now, Buddhaghosa, who was this writer of the Path of Purification, somebody might know, it's a great big tome, which is probably one of the great spiritual manuals of the world. In the 5th century, this was his definition. This is how he defined all virtues. Yeah, metta has the mode of friendliness as its characteristic. Its natural function is to promote friendliness. It is manifested as the disappearance of ill will. That's a bit odd, isn't it? To manifest something that disappears. But it's basically when there's no ill will, you know that it's got to be metta. And its footing, its basis, is seeing with kindness. Now, here's a line which I like. When it succeeds, it eliminates ill will, because you can't have those two mental states together, right? If you've got goodwill, there can't be ill will there. When it fails, it degenerates into selfish, affectionate desire. So those are a couple of strong lines there. And metta, of course, appears quite often in the Buddha's lists, these interminable lists. Is one of the perfections. It's one of the divine abodes, which is the most beautiful mental state that you can develop. It's one of the four illimitables with compassion, joy, and equanimity. It means that you can just develop it indefinitely, right? And it's also a suitable subject to develop these absorptions, these sort of blissed out states. Okay, so the first stanza, this is what has to be done. One has to be skilled in what is good in order to reach the peaceful state. Okay, Santam Padam, the path of peacefulness. Now, this is about achieving Nibbana, but you'll find if you do that course that he sort of stretches it into peace in society, peace within yourself and all that. But it's actually, this discourse is actually about achieving Nibbana. But it is worthwhile to notice when you're peaceful, because that quality of passaddhi is a quality of the 7 factors of enlightenment. It's one of those things that we ought to develop just generally, you know. So these are the things that we in a sense, he's presuming that we've developed a little bit. The first one is sakko, which means a confidence, a capability in doing this sort of work. And we'll end up by suggesting one way that we can do that. The next one is to be uju cha suhuju cha, which means to be upright, really upright. So this is to do with, our moral rectitude. Yeah. And to sort of get away from the stuff that comes out of delusion, of acquisitiveness, aversion, and fear. The next one is suvacho, which means skillful speech when spoken. So it's to be, the speech has to be kindly, it has to be truthful, beneficial, and rather importantly, timely, right? So it might be kind, truthful, and beneficial, but you shouldn't have said it then. Mudu is a softness, a tenderness, and it's normally put with the word for heart. So it's a gentle heart, a tender heart, a gentle person. And atimani is to be without pride, arrogance, conceit, to be sort of unpretentious. So those are sort of virtues that we need to develop. And then he carries on. Now, the next verse, he says, to be content, santusako, to be contented. Now, this isn't the contentment that you get when you've done a good job and you feel contented, or you found someone whom you like to be with and you feel contented. This contentment is a basic line. It's a sort of basic attitude of contentment. To enter each moment with that sort of sense of this will do, right? This contentment doesn't mean you can't change something, but it underlies this everything that we do, a sense of contentment. The next one is subara, which means easily maintained, right? This actually probably refers to the monastics. But for us, but it's a case of making a distinction between what you need, what you want, and what is actually sufficient, and that will determine on whatever you have to do in your daily life. But basically, it's really needing only little, and these days, of course, with climate change, it has a bit more meaning. The next one is apakicho, which means to be less busy. Well, I think that rings a bell, doesn't it? We're always trying to do too much, trying to achieve too much, burnout and all that sort of stuff. So it's good to reflect upon our lifestyle, just, find out where we're actually stressing and to just let go of a few things. I think it's to do with priority, and there's also I think what also helps in life is to make the small tasks that we do meaningful. Just, washing pots, vacuuming, and all that sort of stuff. Normally, we want to get them out of the way, and get on with life. But if you see them as an occasion where you can just stop for a minute and do them very mindfully in a very relaxed way, abandoning all ill will, they become little islands, you see. And then from there, you launch into your next project. So remember the old Zen saying, when you wash the pots, just wash the pots. Engaging lightly, salahuka vutti. So this is not to take things too serious, to keep mindfulness, not to be able to relax and to have that wholesome heart attitude. It's actually, just to keep a smile on the face. The background smile really helps, so you don't get too serious about things. Sant'Indrio, this is quietening the faculties. So, we're a very visual culture, with all this YouTube and TV and Netflix and social media. And we're always looking for some sort of sensual delight, food, the countryside. We're always looking for that sort of excitement. And in a sense, that misses the mark because it's not quite a happiness, right? And that's why often excitement doesn't work for us. Whatever used to make us really excited, loses its flavor. So it is a case of, being more content. It sort of comes back to being content and to just every so often to spend some time just looking at a blank wall and just allowing that sense to calm down a bit, Nipako just means prudent, wise, discreet, thoughtful. So that's a lovely quality, isn't it? To be considerate, basically, to be aware of what other people need, not always centering upon ourselves. Apagabo means to be modest, to be courteous and not impudent. So again, it's about not pushing yourself. I mean, the word humility doesn't go down too well these days because we all believe in the sovereign self, But humility actually just means to be natural and to be in communication with people, to see yourself in relationship, Ananugido is not, well, this is again a reinforcement, not to hanker after worldly things. So, it's like when you walk down the shopping mall or something like that. So your eyes constantly gazing at things, the clothes, the jewelry, the computer, the laptops, the phones. It's always looking for something, How, but if you're there to get something specific, just go for it. And then have a cup of tea. So all this is about, calming the senses, just calming down, trying to be much more contented. The third stanza. So he sums it all up here. He says not to commit even the slightest deeds that a wise person could find fault with. So that's basically sums it up, yeah. Now, this wise person is the spiritual friend, your Kalyanamitta. So that could be a teacher, it could be a very close friend, somebody whom you can talk to about things which have a spiritual meaning. And if there isn't one, there's always the Buddha within. I mean, when I have a moral question, or in a sense, any question, if I just sit very still and just ask this Buddha within, just plonk the question into the heart, I normally get a fairly good answer, So we have a sort of a wisdom inside us, But often, sometimes, of course, we're overcome with doubt, and to discuss it with somebody can be very helpful. And then we get the first well-wishing. So may all beings live in safety, kemino, and in gladness, sukhi, sukhinos. The word sukhi just means happy. And if you put a D instead, it's dukhi. That means you're not happy. And then it says, Sabesata Bhavantu Sukhitata. So may all beings develop, may become more happy, right? So that's your first thing. He's giving us a hint as to what we ought to say. And it's not about me feeling bad. Well, when you're doing the method, it's not about making yourself feel happy. Your intention is about others. I mean, there is a point where you turn into yourself and say, may I be happy? There's no problem with that. But you're not practicing metta in order to be happy. Then it just becomes a self-centered practice. You're doing it in order to establish a relationship with the world, which is one of giving, of offering. Yeah. And then he gives us ways in which we can do this. Gives us a technique which we can do it. So he says, whatever beings there are, weak or strong, without exception, long or short, big, medium size, small, subtle or gross. Now the word here is panna, which means breathing beings. So I presume this includes insects, but I'm not so sure about bacteria if they're beings. And what he's suggesting is, no matter how a being looks, yeah, it's always that attitude of offering goodwill. Doesn't matter what their physical shape is. In the second verse, he sort of opens it out. He says, to those who are visible or invisible, right? Can't even see them. Residing near or far, those who've already been born and those who've yet to be born. This is almost sort of transcending space and time, okay? So you're really sort of just expanding it outwards. Mm-hmm. Now, in the sixth verse, it's let no one now he's come back to, well, once you've developed this metta, you can't do this sort of thing. You can't deceive somebody. So to deceive somebody really is to take advantage of them, you know. And let me see, I've lost my place here. Nanga, let him wish no harm. Yeah, not to take advantage of somebody. And then the next one is not to despise anybody, right? So you have to be careful about that. Not to be excessively, not to be angrily critical. You've got to watch out for jealousy and bad mouthing. Mm. And of course, this also refers to ourselves, you know, what they call the inner critic, you know, when you hear yourself lambasting yourself, just turn towards it and say, calm down, you know. You have to turn it into a little devil and give it a hug. So again, it's not wishing harm to anyone. He sums it up with that, not wishing harm to anyone. And in the seventh verse, he points out, just as a mother would protect her only child at the risk of her own life, even so we should cultivate boundless thoughts of loving kindness towards all beings. Now, that's a very strong image, a mother protecting a child who's being threatened. And I saw a video of a lion and a lioness who were beginning to mate, and they were walking at opposite sides of a fence that was obviously a containment in a reservation for them. And as the lion moved down one side of the fence, he was sort of giving sounds of yawning, if you can imagine that, like a lion yawning. And she, the lioness, was coming the other way with a companion yawning as well, you see. So I thought when they get together, there'd be a bit of hanky-panky and smooching, you see. But in fact, as soon as he got close to her, he attacked her viciously. And both of these lionesses attacked him. And then he pulled away, you see. And I thought, well, that is so strange, because there was no comment about it. But what happens is, if a lioness has cubs by a particular lion, then the lion goes off, you know, he's done his bit. If a stray lion comes past, he'll try to kill all those cubs, mate with her so that she has his cubs. And she has to defend them. And sometimes she's actually killed, but most times she just comes away with bites and bruises. So what he was doing was testing her fierceness. And then in the video, the commentator says, and now he's showing respect. I couldn't work that out, but seemingly he was showing her respect. And of course, we have the story of the Buddha quietening the elephant that had been set upon him by the dastardly Devadatta, who was a cousin and wanted to lead the order. He had lots of criticism, and that was the picture I had up before. Just in case you didn't see it, I'll just share the screen quickly. So that's the mudra. That's what we associate with loving kindness. That hand, you see, offering it from love, is nicely moved there. Normally, it's just a flat hand, which isn't so appealing. And in his lap, I'm taking that to be the Dharma, the jewel of the Dharma. It's a Thai statue, that. So now we have a third way in which we can develop that metta, and it goes even further. Let him cultivate a boundless thoughts of loving kindness towards the whole world. And what he means there is, of course, all the worlds, all the cosmos, above, below, and all around. So that's that practice of doing it in the 6 directions. Normally, it's a compass thing, north, south, and all that. And as we do it, all beings in front, behind, left, right, below, and above. Unobstructed, free from hatred and enmity. Now, the next verse, he says, he's saying that this should be developed all the time. It should be just a natural state of mind. So whether you're standing, walking, seated, or lying down, so as long as you're awake, you should develop this mindfulness. Now, whenever I read a translation, I always slip in affectionate there, right? It's not just mindfulness, it's an affectionate mindfulness. Now, just now, you see, as we're all looking at each other, just put a little kindling of kindness in your heart towards everybody. See? You can do it, can't you? See, that can be there all the time, even when we're not so aware of it. And that's what he's asking us to do. And he calls it a divine abiding. So this is like being a god. And in the final verse, he sums it up. He says, you don't want to have erroneous views. So these are about the views about how we create suffering for ourselves through wrong desire, understanding impermanence, and the fact that, we have to get used to the idea that we're going to grow old, sick, and die. And this relationship we have with the body, heart, and mind of it being me, right? So that's the identity of having this human form. And our practice of Vipassana is trying to make that clear. And in fact, what we are looking for is what's looking, right? There's also erroneous views about karma, that you can't get away with anything. It comes back in one way or the other. There's a very interesting quote from Jung that I came across. He says, whatever has been repressed will manifest as fate. And if you look at your life and you find yourself doing something over and over again, falling into the same sort of mistake, then underneath that, there will be some sort of suppressed or repressed mental state. I think that's really quite an insight. So and then endowed with these virtues and wise with insight. Now, the next line is a bit heavy because you have to abandon all sensual desire. But remember, it doesn't mean you stop eating. It just means to abandon the wrong desire, right? Which is that greed, which is trying to get happiness from the sensual world as a permanent thing. That's the problem. Happiness arises and passes away like anything else. And then he says, you don't have to be reborn again. The actual translation is not to be conceived in a womb. Basically, you don't have to be reborn. So that's just a quick run through this particular discourse. So, okay, so how do we practice it? Well, remember that it's good to have a touchstone. It's good to have something you can go back to, which raises that sense of warmth, that kindling in the heart. So, for instance, I know one teacher talks about holding a baby, you see. You use a pet. Yeah, we always love pets. Um, or we normally start with a benefactor. So that's somebody who warms the heart, you see. Now, if you've got that and you've developed it a bit, you can always go back to it. Whenever we move into a category and you feel that the warmth in the heart has gone, you just go back and remind yourself of that kindling by bringing that person or the pet or whatever it is to mind. And remember that you're developing it in order to develop right attitude towards all beings. And the other thing is not to worry if it doesn't come, see, because the heart has its own logic, doesn't it? You want to feel loving, you're just not feeling it. So if you obsess about that, then it becomes a misery. But just by doing the practice, I think you'll find. Now, I was I have a poet, General Manley Hopkins, whom some of you might know. He's known as the father of modern English poetry, and some of his sonnets are really about his own spiritual development. And there's one that starts, "My own heart, let me more have pity on. Let me live to my sad self, hereafter kind, charitable. Not live this tormented mind, with this tormented mind tormenting yet. I cast for comfort, I can no more get by groping round my comfortless than blind eyes in their darkened day, or thirst can find thirsts all in a world of wet." So those first two lines I've often used, my own heart, let me more have pity, And if you can get that kindling within yourself, then you offer it out from there. I find it extremely strong. Let me live to my sad self hereafter, kind and charitable, to my anxious self, to my angry self, to my guilty self, you see. It doesn't do much for the poem, but you can use it that way so that you can generate a warmth towards yourself. And of course, it's easier to move from that heart. But as I say, if it's not there, not to worry at all, you can use your pet or something to generate it. Okay. Very good. So I thought what we would do is, instead of usually ending with the refuges and precepts, we would start with those. And then I would do that guidance through the Metta Sutta. And then we would continue until the end, when I would read the discourse, a translation of the discourse, and end off with our usual chant of Sabbe Sata Sukhita Hontu. Okay. So I can only hope my words have been of some assistance, and that by your practice of metta, you will generate the beautiful heart that will lead you to everlasting peace and happiness.